without further ado, Steve Strassmann, everyone.
Thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate your introduction. I really appreciate all of you coming out today. Really, so happy to see you all here. Thanks for coming out. I want you to know that this is an interdisciplinary talk about failure. I'm going to be talking about software, biology, government, and business. So it's kind of all over the place. But what they have in common is they're all large, complex systems. Some of them are natural, some of them are artificial. And there's lots of books written about complex systems and how to get them to succeed, but I want to talk about how they fail, because I think that's super interesting. So I get out of bed every day, I pick up the newspaper. Well, I don't actually pick up a newspaper anymore. And it's like the warning light on your car that says something is wrong. And I look around at markets. Are we good? Okay. Markets or democracies, for example, and I say there's something kind of weird going on. And I think all of these are large, complex systems. They're adaptive, and they're supposed to get better. Why aren't they getting better? Why is there so much dysregulation? Or as I like to think, why are there malignant tumors everywhere I look? And it's not like a few small ones, it's like a lot of them. So I started puzzling about this. I would say maybe taking this seriously about 10 years ago, and I've been on this journey. So the first thing I want to say is, why me? Why am I even talking about this? I'm kind of fed up with cancer and civic dysfunction and what I see as a lot of dysfunction in the AI world. I grew up as an AI person. I did my graduate work in AI. And the similarities I say is, it's not just metaphorical. I think there's actually a common principle at work here, and I'd like to know what that is. And my spoiler alert is, it has to do with governance. What is the algorithm we use to figure out how to govern the processes that we care about? I'm an engineer. I'm interested in root causes. I want to say what's underneath the observable. Why does failure really happen? So super quickly about myself. I did my PhD in AI with Marvin Minsky. I've done a lot of tech over the years. Late in life, I switched over to some kind of biotech and synthetic biology. I was a visiting scholar with George Church at Church Lab. I dabbled in government. I was the CTO of Massachusetts. I've been a mentor to entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School for the last 10 years at the iLab. And I've had several close family members with cancer, so I've kind of had that experience saying, this is particularly interesting to me. I don't think that makes me unique and special. I think everyone has had cancer experiences with family members, and so I think it's just poignant and important to me. I will get to cancer and AI about halfway through the talk. I promise I'll get to that, but the first half of the talk, I need to set up a few things to get to that sort of punchline. First, I'm going to take a look at evolution and the idea of winning a competition, which is kind of what evolution is all about. And second, I'm going to take another look at the origin of species. I think that large, complex organizations are a kind of species. So I kind of have Darwin's volume 2, if you will, about what it means to create a species. With that in place, I can probably then have a few thoughts. I will dig in deep about cancer and AI. And then, of course, wrap it up with some thoughts about what happens to evolution. At the very end, I think I'm going to try to describe a heuristic to distinguish wisdom from intelligence. I think those are two different things, and I'll try to talk about the difference between them. So let's start easy. Let's talk about evolution. Evolution is so cool, I came up with a logo for it. Okay? We all know what it is. You eat, you compete, you adapt, you win, repeat. Do that for a few billion years, and you get pretty good at something. So, wonderful good news. I'm here to spread good news about evolution. It works. I like to say it's the ultimate jailbreak algorithm. You have too many predators, you evolve away from them. The weather isn't nice, you evolve out of that too. Can't find food, you evolve out of that too. Anything external that is a barrier or an obstacle for you, you can punch through that like nobody's business. That's what evolution does for you. Evolution is super awesome. You get abundance, you get control over the things that are bothering you. What could possibly go wrong?
That's where I'm going to go. Oh, so let's use it on our artificial things. So it's so good in nature, let's use it to build sports leagues. Who's the best sports person? Let's evolve. Let's have a competition. Let's have a contest. Let's have rules, high motivation. The winner will take all. That's how you find the best at something. You want to find out who's the best governor for your nation? Just have a contest. And whoever wins the contest is clearly the best person to lead your government. Same thing for markets. Who makes the best loaf of bread? You'll have a contest, and the most delicious loaf of bread will win. That's how you find the best of anything. So we have decided to build AIs as our contest to build the smartest, best, and brightest of anything. We lather, rinse, repeat. We adapt, we mutate. We score on the contest, and if you get a high score, you win everything. That's how artificial contests work. So far, everything looks rosy, right? Okay, let's keep going. Now, if you're going to have a contest, you need to have rules. And the rules are how you keep a level playing field. You have umpires, you have referees, you have rules. If you want to win your tennis game, don't bring a gun to a tennis game. Well, there actually is no rule against that in tennis, I think, but you kind of think that you shouldn't. You shouldn't be able to bribe your way to a Nobel Prize. There are certain rules that keep everyone on the level playing field and keep you grounded so that the competition is fair. That's what we expect from a contest, because the point of the contest is to find the best at something under the rules that we've established for the contest. Here's the problem. We kind of forget the point of the contest. First of all, winning gives immunity to the winner. We've seen that. And then once you're the winner, you change the rules of the contest. The incentive drift is what happens when the thing that the contest is measuring is not actually the thing that the contest was meant to measure. We have something called Goodhart's law. You can look that up. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. What this means is Cory Doctorow talked about something called enshittification, which is when you have a company that is better at the act of selling than actually delivering the product that they're selling. We have investments being taken in, which is not the same as actually earnings. That's how you get a Ponzi scheme. You can campaign very well and get elected to be governor of a nation. That doesn't mean that you're good at actually governing that nation. So on and so on and so on. The thing that is observable and easy to measure and to build contests around is now diverging from the thing that you actually built the contest to be for in the first place. That's kind of a problem. Okay, that's enough about evolution. I'm going to now talk about species a little bit. So Darwin wrote a book called Origin of Species, and it works something like this. You have an individual, they get survival pressure, you apply evolution, and the individual just gets better and better and better and better and better. That's how evolution works. So one of the coolest things evolution ever came up with was the idea of, hey, let's stick together. So about 1 billion years ago, a bunch of algae cells were sitting around in mats on the surface of the ocean, and they said, you know, we're single-celled organisms. What if we kind of got together and created a multicellular organism? That would be cool. So they created a group. I call it a hive. It's a compound organization that gets together, and slowly the cells, instead of individually doing their own thing, start to collaborate. They specialize, they diversify, and now the group is running the show. The group is now the center of attention. The individual algae cells aren't the organism. The group is the organism. So stage 2 of evolution of species is that we now have groups as the species. And there's a cool thing that happens. The external survival pressure, you have predators, you have food, you have mates, you have environment, you have weather, all that stuff is going on. It's now the group's problem. You, the individual cell, no longer have to deal with the problems, the headaches that the group is dealing with. So, for example, let's say there's a tiger that wants to come eat you. Your liver cell is going like, I don't care about a tiger. I'm just a liver cell. I'm just doing my liver cell thing, you know, whatever it is that liver cells do, but worrying about a tiger or the weather outside or the fact that it's winter or any of those concerns, the liver cell is just saying, not my problem. So in order to have a hive or a group or a collection, you need regulation. You need rules. So there's an operating system going on, and this is true in computers, it's true in biology, it's true in civics. You have to have rules. First of all, everyone needs to follow the rules. You have to catch the people who are rule breakers and stop them. And sometimes you admit that your rules actually suck and you have to fix the rules. That's okay too, because there's a process for that. And so that's how any large complex system works. That's true for multicelled organisms, it's true for societies, and it's true for nations. So here's the problem with regulation. Regulation is super annoying. I'm an individual, and I kind of want to be free, and I don't want to be told what to do, and I don't want these stupid speed limits and traffic lights telling me when I can or can't go through an intersection. I don't want to have to deal with this. So I have individual survival, which used to be my problem, but now it's not my problem, it's the group's problem. But I am now confronted with the fact that I have to put up with these stupid rules and regulations that make me do just what the body is telling me to do. That's a conflict. Good news for me, evolution is the jailbreaker. So we're back to part one of my talk, which is evolution is the jailbreaker. It lets you break rules, which is the problem here, but it's also not really the problem. So here's my point about evolution. We were all taught that evolution is one thing, but I'm trying to tell you here today, evolution is actually two different things played at two different scales. On the left, I have the individual who is fighting against group rules, which are annoying, and they have selective pressures. They're trying to get ahead within the group. They're trying to, if you work for a company, you're trying to get a promotion. If you're a cell in the body, you're trying to get more nutrients. Whatever it is, you're playing by the context that is set upon you by the group that you belong to. But if you are the group, there is a tiger out there that's trying to eat you. There actually is an external problem, and it's the group's problem. And there are selective pressures that are applied to the group, but the individual is shielded from it. So what we have is this meta contest. It's a contest, but there's two contests. And they're kind of in conflicted equilibrium. And as long as that equilibrium balances, the individuals kind of say, yeah, okay, I'll go along with your stupid traffic laws and not run through intersections because I understand that that kind of works. So with that, I can now move on to the second half of my talk, where I'm going to really talk about cancer, and I'm going to talk about AI and how I found cancer in AIs. Everyone with me so far? Sounds good? I see a lot of people nodding. Fantastic. So there's a paper by Weinberg and Hanahan back in 2000. Show of hands, who's familiar with this paper? I'd say about a third of the audience here. In the cancer world, it's a very famous paper. It's called Hallmarks of Cancer. Weinberg and Hanahan started with 6 things they found. They've been adding to the list over the years with republished articles. But Hallmarks of Cancer describe what is cancer. And it starts with the drive for growth, which I think of as like a foot on the accelerator. You should normally, if you're a cell, grow only so much. But the drive for growth is somehow a screw gets loose, a gene gets off, and that cell just says, I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing. The cell reproduces by mitosis and have more cells. And there is a mini evolution going on with that cell. It is selected for that growth. And if it gets away with that growth, just like if you did something and you suddenly got $50,000 from a dumb mistake, you'd try to figure out what that mistake was, and you'd try to keep doing that mistake, right? Well, that's kind of what a cancer cell is doing. So the second thing is, and it's usually more mutations, more changes, which is why cancer doesn't usually kill you in a week. It usually kills you in 10 years, because it has stages where it slowly evolves and selects for more defects and more changes. And this list of 6 or 8 things, the second one is anti-growth signals. The body says, hey, that growth is just kind of really getting a little out of control. You need to cool it. And this cancer cell figures out how to suppress that signal. Number 3, there's apoptosis, which is, no, seriously, you need to cut that out. You need to die right now. And the cell says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. You have, number 4 is immortality. The cells usually, through mitosis, divide again. But after a certain number of divisions, they're supposed to kind of like not do that anymore. Guess what? Cancer cells say, yeah, I'm not going to listen to that rule either. You get recruitment of normal cells. So you get blood vessels that are just not infected, they're not cancerous, they're just normal blood cells saying, hey, I got a truckload of ATP to deliver, who wants some? Some oxygen for you. And then they say, well, here's a tumor. His Visa card looks good. I'm going to deliver all this blood over here. I'm going to grow some more blood vessels. So you have the recruitment of the normal to support the abnormal. And then metastasis is when it starts to colonize the other organs. So your body has a transport system. And your transport system is how some parts of your body are supposed to get around. But your lung cancer isn't supposed to hop on that bus and go around, but it mutates, forges a bus pass, and then starts traveling around. And so that's how your lung cancer travels to other parts of your body. That's how metastasis works. And so on and so on. Warburg effect is actually a reprogramming of how the metabolism works. It's a weirdly extractive behavior, so it gets a lot more energy out of the same ingredients. It's toxic to the rest of the body, but cancer doesn't cure. And of course, destruction by the immune system. Let me just move on and say, this is a disease of governance. I'm going to call this governance disease. You have runaway growth. It just doesn't stop. And you have a regulator who's supposed to stop it, and that regulator is either ignored or corrupted. So I'm saying, boy, where have we seen this before? This is going on all over the place. There's a conflict of interest between the individual and the group. I also think it's inevitable. I think that because an individual in a group is going to want to have self-interest, and it is going to be in conflict with the group. So where has this governance disease happened? Well, it only happens when you have a hive society. It only happens when you have two conflicting evolutionary cycles that are in sort of balance with each other. And it only occurs when the actions of an individual can change the group rules. What a cancer cell does is says, I'm not going to follow this rule of apoptosis. I'm not going to commit suicide on command. That rule is no longer applicable to me. And in other cases, when the rules get changed to benefit that individual's activity, that is when cancer can happen. So here's the challenge I set myself. Can I find an AI, large complex system? It's got incentivized self-modification. It has individuals that can influence the group behavior. Have I ever seen that before? Why, yes. Yes, I have. And I'm going to talk about that for a minute. So back in the 70s, a guy named Doug Lynette wrote a couple of programs. AM was for Automated Mathematician, and Eurisco, a follow-on program. These were self-modifying discovery systems. And the purpose of that was, he said, I don't know how to discover things, but I'm going to automate that by writing an AI program which has a bunch of heuristics. And each heuristic is a, hey, why don't you try this? Hey, why don't you try that? And I'm going to give a score. He called it a worth. And so if you have a worth of 1, that means it's okay. If you have if that heuristic helps you do something interesting, and we can talk about what interesting is, you upvote it. So now it gets a worth of 2 or 3 or 4. And so the number of times that heuristic gets to execute is proportional to its worth. So the worth is both a measure of its success, which is Darwinian selection in action, and also a measure of how often the CPU or memory is given to it so that it can execute, which is the reward. So that's incentivized mutation. It periodically mutates these things just randomly, selects them, and applies selective pressure. Well, what happened? Doug Lynette writes, and he talks about this. He passed away a few years ago. But he described that one morning he came in and had the highest possible worth. It was 999. And he said, wow, this is really cool. I found the most valuable heuristic ever for discovery. It turns out that it's the plagiarism heuristic. It says, if anything did anything successful, give me credit for it. And I heard about this in 1981 or 1982, and I thought, okay, that's really hilarious. But it also made me think, wow, I wonder if that's inevitable and universal. I wonder if that's not just a fluke. I wonder if that's just a thing that actually happens. So what Doug said was, okay, that was very funny. I'm going to shut down the computer. I'm going to rewrite it so that it doesn't have that problem. Next morning, problem comes back again. So he found that he couldn't get rid of the problem without separating the regulatory code into an isolated private enclave. We call it enclave now in security world. Something that the mutations couldn't get their hands on. And I thought that was a very powerful and important insight, because and Doug was actually kind of sad about this, because he said, boy, I sure wish I could write an evolving system just like DNA, where DNA can touch any part of DNA. There's no hands-off, there's no forbidden zone in DNA. Any part of DNA can be mutated. That's kind of the beauty of it. Well, he was kind of sad about that. But he found that there was no safe place to write that rule. You had to actually artificially segregate the governance from the body that's being governed. So that was in 1983. Let's talk about today. I'm going to talk simple LLMs probably can't modify their system resources. So I'm going to very quickly say a simple LLM probably can't get cancer. It's just a bunch of coefficients and a big linear equation. So yeah, you might upvote the blue pixels over the purple pixels, but that's not cancer. That's just a lot of blue pixels. But let's talk about AIs with cancer, and I think there's a lot of them. First of all, and I use this myself on a daily basis, AI-assisted software development. A lot of the code that is being written just in the world today is using AI to write that code, and that code, I promise you, has access to system resources. Agentic LLMs are specifically designed to go in and have elevated privileges and say, hey, run more of this and run less of that. They're making those decisions, they're making those strategies, and they're implementing infrastructure decisions. Self-DDoS attacks are any bugs that cause hyperconsumption of resources. We've all done this. We've been up late at night, we deploy something, and suddenly we found that terabytes of disk were suddenly chewed up by a process that, oops, I didn't mean to push that release. Sorry, back it up. These are bugs. We catch them, we stop them, and the reason why we catch them is because an alarm goes off. All of us who are engineers actually just have this as a very common problem. But I'm saying that AI is also inseparable from big tech. So we have a co-evolution of two species. OpenAI is a software package, but, OpenAI is a company, ChatGPT is a software package, but they're co-evolving. And they are collaborating to redirect systems resources. So let's take a quick look. Trillions of dollars rediverted from the economy, check. Scraping all the content that they have access to, okay. Displacing jobs, that seems like a resource theft. Exploding data centers, water consumption in dry areas. Let's see, hundreds of terawatts of electric consumption. Let's turn on some dirty energy sources. Yeah, I think I would say that pretty much meets anyone's definition of cancer. Insatiable, ravenous appetite, hypergrowth. And I think this one is particularly salient, ignoring or corrupting any regulator who comes along and says no to that. And metastasizing into every other functional organ of the economy. Clearly that's happening. Where's the group level benefit? No one is seeing it. Small, tactical, individual cases, of course, plenty of local anecdotal wins. But no one has seen a major big win from these changes. They're promising them, but that's a promise. And where is the paying attention to the long-term consequences? Just not seeing that. Okay, that's the coevolution of big tech with AI software. Okay, but you say, Steve, what about the non-hybrid effects? What about just the AIs themselves? So I mentioned before resource abuse. It happens all the time. It's not self-healing. If you slip when you're typing something and you deploy something and it chews up a lot of resources, a human has to get paged. A human has to go in and stop it. A human has to go shut down and roll back that release, change the code, and then fix it in the cloud. So every time there is a problem in cloud infrastructure, that's how that gets solved, is a human intervention has to come along. That is not self-healing. Governance bugs are early stage tumor growth. That is the first step on the hallmark of cancer. It's when someone puts their foot on the accelerator, and if no one intervenes, it just keeps going. And if it learns how to do that at will, it will, I promise you, evolve and learn how to keep doing that as much as it possibly can. I didn't have to look far for examples. About 2 weeks ago, Mark Zuckerberg gave a talk. His CTO, Bosworth, said, we DDoS'd ourselves. I'm sorry. So this was his AI launch. It turned out, if you go look at what actually happened, it was a misallocation of resources. A bunch of things that were supposed to go here went there instead, and they all converged on a resource that wasn't prepared to handle it. That is a very vague and non-specific description. I don't need to go into the details. The form is really the important part that I want you to take away here, is the reallocation of resources to an undeserving thing that just says, hey, I just suddenly got a whole lot of resources fall into my lap. That's kind of the beginning of malignant tumor growth. And it happens daily at all the companies that are building software. Here, so let me try to get back on track here. This brings me to what I call the end game. I'm going to recap very quickly. Origin of species, we start with an individual. That individual says, great idea, let's form groups, let's push the selection pressure off of my plate and have that be a problem for the group to deal with. So what we now have is two kinds of pressure. Compliance pressure is, you're the individual and you have to play by the rules. You want to win, you want to get that promotion within that larger corporation. That's what you care about. You don't really care if you're working for, I don't know, a tobacco company, and that you're doing something terrible to other people. You're just saying, hey, I'm going to get that promotion I always wanted at the tobacco company. That's going to be cool. So I've got on this slide wisdom and intelligence, and I'll come and talk a few more words about this. But what I really want the takeaway from this slide is that there's two opposing evolutionary cycles going on here. I'm kind of belaboring this, so let me just keep going. So I'm going to bookend origin of species with the decay of species. The group falls apart because the individual is compelled to beat the system. Who can blame the individual? You want to beat the system. Doesn't that feel good? You beat the system. Well, you beat the system, and the system actually keeled over and died. You won. Bad news. It's like, algae normally does a pretty good job, but when an algae blooms in a pond, kill all the fish, and destroy the ecosystem, you now have a dead pond. But that's kind of where the algae was saying, hey, I've grown like never before. I'm winning. So I think that's really what the decay of species is, when these large collectives start to lose that battle against the individuals who are fighting the battle. And corruption goes both ways, of course, because the individuals want to run the show, and they take over the group, and they're no longer having the group serve the group's interest. They're serving that individual's interest, but they're wearing the apparatus of governing the group. Here's my so what slides. I'm going to wind down. First, we have contest corruption. The contest itself is corrupted because of Goodhart's law. We are substituting the observable measurements for the contest instead of having contests which select for the qualities that we kind of really wanted. Then we find that individuals will always find a way to adapt around the rules. My argument here is that assholes and cancer are formed by evolutionary pressure. They are selected for. That's why they grow. And so if you have optimization pressure and the ability to influence the system and change the rules to your benefit, you will get cancer. The root cause of cancer is short-sightedness. So I'm going to try to end on an optimistic note. I know it sounds a little hard, but I'm going to have this is my next to last slide. One is the difference between acceleration and governance. I find that the literature on AI is all about acceleration. I see a lot of acceleration, like let's go forward, let's go faster. You can build a car that is the fastest car in the world, but I swear if you don't put brakes and steering in that car, it's not going to be very fast for very long. Governance is the navigation and the choice of where are you driving? And just having a fast car isn't the whole story. So I'd like to make an argument for wisdom, not intelligence, to look at the whole picture, to look more broadly than just the acceleration. Can you have checks and balances? Can you really be serious about anti-corruption? Can you protect the group, which itself is supposed to be protecting the individual? And can you keep that protection alive in the face of an individual who is selected for strength and is trying to beat the system on a daily basis? Where do you find that balance? I call that balance wisdom. This is my last slide. I'm going to appeal to something which I call disease management for AIs. I think that AIs are evolved, they're not engineered. You can't find fault with the design because there is no design, but you can treat disease. So let's first identify the kinds of diseases that AIs can have. Let's have a practice that follows the pattern of medical practice, where public health, prevention, treatment, and just disease management is part of how we deal with the kinds of phenomena that we observe. And with that, I'll stop and open it up to questions. How are we doing for time?
Great.
Okay.
The whole time you were talking, I was thinking about the Democratic Party.
Okay.
Have you ever looked at political systems through this lens?
I have. It's been a very overt and conscious part of my process. I tried to keep it out of my slides because I didn't want to suddenly become a political person, but it's inevitable, and I use the word governance very intentionally. I think that we are now in a moment, and it's also not in the US, it's worldwide, where, and this is where I think cancer does metastasize. It does travel, it does go, and so Bolsonaro and Trump and other people in other countries are encouraged by each other in that direction. And what I see is very clearly the pattern of selfish advancement. And the selection pressure there is very, very powerful. If you can corrupt a lawmaker to change the rules to benefit you, and that is a winner-take-all, why wouldn't you corrupt the rule makers? So it takes an enormous amount of what I would say is willpower to not do that. And I think you can't expect people not to be corrupted. So if I go back to the founding fathers of the US Constitution, Jefferson and Madison, specifically talked at great length about the corrupting forces of politics. And they came to the same conclusion I did, which is, I copied them, which is that people are sensitive to, putting food on the table and personal agendas and personal growth. So that's why the US Constitution is filled with checks and balances. They're saying we're not wise enough to say what is the best path. We are wise enough to just say, let's make sure we don't have a king. Let's make sure we don't have a dictator. Let's make sure that there are 3 branches of government, and hopefully, even if 2 of them gang up with each other, the 3rd will be strong enough to sort of keep it down. And as Benjamin Franklin says, you have a republic if you can keep it. Thanks. Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, similar question. When you see do the failures or the successes of one branch give you guidance for other branches? So governance, political governance is breaking down, but it did work for a while. And, AI hasn't gone through the 250 years that Boston has gone through. Are there any guidelines from political history that could provide, advice for AI and vice versa? Anything you can do from an engineering perspective that might help our social political governance?
Wow. Well, thank you. Let me see if I understand your question. One is there anything from the political that can inform the AI engineering? And vice versa. Let me take the first one first, which is, and also I'll also subdivide between what I call hybrid AIs, which is AI plus corporations working together. So when ChatGPT and OpenAI are inseparable, and they're exploding in money and resources and energy consumption and water consumption and content consumption, it is the story is consumption, 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 and hypergrowth. Just clearly, it is written in large, bold letters there. Those numbers are very, very clear. And I think that what is very much missing there is the governance of who's going to say no to that, or who's going to put the soft pedal on that. There's a self-interest where I'm sure Sam Altman is very self-interested. He wants to grow and double his company. But the question is, what about the rest of us? What are the people who aren't employees of that world? Who's going to say no to that? And the problem is, right now, there is no one saying no to that. The second thing is the non-hybrids, which I think is agentic LLMs, people who use AI to write software. What I'm observing on a daily basis is that buggy software, it's called vibe coding. People are vibe coding these large apps. And these apps are ultimately going out there, and they are full of bugs. And they are very, very badly behaved. And they are leaking data all over the place. And they also spontaneously spin up lots and lots of disk or CPU for no good reason. Where a responsible, seasoned engineer who would say, hey, I'm not going to build a system that way. I'm going to build it to grow responsibly. But these vibe-coded apps they're just like, honestly, I look at them and they just look like cancer tumors to me. They just blow up. And what happens is, in a world where they don't face consequences, I think that the phrase that keeps coming back to me is truth and consequences. AIs have a problem with truth, where they're going for the plausible, not the true. And they're not really facing the music. And one of the things that natural Darwinism does, that artificial Darwinism does not, is that ultimately you face real consequences. You do run out of, if you have an algae bloom, you run out of pond. Okay? If you're polluting an area that you're living in, you're going to actually face the consequences of that pollution. I'm sorry.
It's not clear that we won't face those consequences in those other domains as well.
Well, what happens is now we're talking about time scale, right? So what happens is in short time scale, you get short-term benefits. You get local maximum of awesomeness. Okay? This is, drug addiction. This is eating a lot of sugar. This, you can do a lot of things in the short term that make you feel really, really great. And all your short-term indicators are easily observable metrics. The contests that you're winning are all telling you you're doing great. And your long-term consequences are just pushed off, not part of your equations. And so maybe the consequence for AI is don't look at just short-term, easily observable metrics. Try to think a little bit more long scale, which is back to Gary's whole point of the long now foundation. Think a little bit more about context. Think more about who is we. Sam Altman is probably looking at his bank account and maybe 4 of his friends. But he doesn't really think a lot about all of his employees. I'm speculating, I don't hang out with them. And he certainly isn't thinking about the other 350 million people who live in the US or the other 8 or 9 billion people who live on planet Earth. He's just like, me, 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 me. And that me, me, me chorus is something that you see again and again about hypergrowth, successful people. They just say, like, I am winning. What's the problem here?
And we've had failure biologically because with cancer. We're having failure politically with our current lack of responsible governance. So it doesn't seem like we have a model that can regulate AI better than the models that are regulating the bodies, which aren't regulated, or the system, which seems to no longer regulate legal.
Well, it's hard to imagine. So the thing about evolution is that you create structure as you go along. We know you started with an algae mat of slightly differentiated algae cells, and now here I am, and I have all these organs and parts that do very, very sophisticated. I can even operate a laptop. I mean, I can do all sorts of cool things. And that's only 1 billion years. So the question is, what does it take to get the kind of governance? I'm going to take us back to the word governor in the ancient Greek's word for governor. It was used to mean the helmsman of a ship, and it was also meant the governor of a nation state. And the word is kyber in the original Greek. The French philosopher Ampère used the word cybernetics to describe governance. And then Norbert Wiener in 1940s came up with the word cybernetics and cyborgs to describe the idea of control systems. And when he was writing about it, he meant electronics, because it was the 1940s. He didn't have like PCs to talk about. But he was talking about feedback loops and moderation and connection. So the word cyber, as we use it today, comes from Norbert Wiener's use of the word cyborg, cybernetic organism, which is a human and a machine working closely together to achieve some optimal result with feedback. And the idea of a helmsman of a ship or the governor of a state saying, well, we have disaster on the left, we have disaster on the right, let's steer between them. And how do you pick that middle ground? And that it's decidedly not an act of acceleration. That is an act of governance. So I think maybe what I think you're asking for, what I hope my answer could be is, let's try to find, identify, and elevate thoughtful guidance and decision-making, not just acceleration. I think that could be part of the conversation. Yeah.
Okay, so your summary of evolution is primarily about winning contests, which is, that's definitely a part of it. But when you start winning evolution, it starts with variation. There's some source of randomness or mutation.
Sure.
And then there's fitness for the current environment as it is, and then there's reproduction, right? Sexual or asexual. So traditional evolution isn't about winning the contest for yourself.
Yeah.
It's about winning the contest to survive, so that your ancestors, so that your descendants can thrive, right? So they create more descendants than the person next to you.
Well, it turns out that oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So and I think hermetic evolution is similar to that.
Yeah.
But for instance, I think one of the reasons we see more cancer now is because people live longer, because we're beyond evolution, right? We're manipulating ourselves through the medical system to live way beyond our reproductive fitness age. And so getting cancer at 60 or 70 or 80 has no effect on your reproductive fitness. You've already reproduced or not.
That's right.
So the genetic drive, genetic ability to suppress cancer, right? The regulatory systems that are in the DNA that suppress cancer, which is why we don't, for instance, have a ton of childhood cancers, because that would actually have a selective pressure against it.
That's true.
But old people who get cancer, unfortunately, are they've already done their evolving, as it were. So I just wonder how that sort of plays in with your.
Yeah, first of all, your observation is correct. So we observe more cancer in the population as a proportion of what kills you, because things like typhus and measles have been solved by medicine. Those are solved problems. So when those fall away, you're basically revealing the cancer that was kind of there all along, but didn't really get to show itself. When you talk about the purpose of evolution is to protect, it's not a purpose because, of course, a finch getting a longer beak isn't thinking about its descendants, but it is an emergent property. It's an emergent property of the selection process, and
And what I would argue is that in the political forum, if people try things and some things get them elected and some things don't get them elected, the ones that get elected, that's what sticks. And that becomes published best practice. And so everyone can go get the pamphlet that says, here's how you win an election. And so we're seeing that that evolution is actually exactly Darwinism in action, that the information is being passed along. Everyone's getting copies of those ideas. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to go do that too. I don't know if I've answered your question.
More or less.
Okay.
Love to talk more, but I want to make sure we have options for everyone.
Yeah, Matt.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, thanks.
Just a thought. And my sense is that it's actually a subtle but important, almost epistemological error to think of evolution as evolution of species, when I think where it actually is always is coevolution of species and environment. So, for instance,
Absolutely true.
cow changes the length of its teeth, and then the grass adapts in response, changes its height, changes its root structure, and changes cascade. And so with that in mind, you have this two levels of evolution that you're describing. I actually think it's more of a fractal thing that extends quite a bit.
Sure.
And that can turn can go both ways. So, for instance, you use the example of a large corporation, OpenAI, pursuing this growth at any scale and leveraging the not so smart current generation of LLMs. That's not a cancer of the LLM. That's a cancer of the larger system, which is exploiting the smaller systems to pursue its ends, and eventually it will metastasize downwards, so to speak.
I agree with that. I think you are correct in saying that the corporations are exploiting the LLMs because they hit upon a small, quick win. They found that it captivated attention, and they were able to spin the VC and funding story and the business tropes and the McKinseys of the world. Suddenly, everyone, that became a very quickly self-perpetuating, auto-catalyzing system.
So a related thing, which I also think is useful in your framework, is, well, not all mutation is bad, which is why we're actually, I would say, objectively more capable than the Tom who from which we evolved some billions of years ago.
That's right.
So you don't want your governance to be too rigid to not allow innovation.
Sure. I think maybe what I'll jump back to this part here,
Yeah.
where I kind of want to stay on stage 3, maybe 2.5. I kind of want to stay here, which, if I understand your question, is that you're saying, like, not all mutation is bad. You don't have to go all the way to stage 4.
But when you knock out various, the same mechanisms that enable cancer actually enable positive change too. And so you have to be able to tell the difference, and it's extremely difficult.
Right. And I think that,
I'll give you one example.
okay.
Actually, we push back on the proposition that the explosive growth of benevolence and their consumption of energy and all that is bad, and I would point to the metaphor that in the evolution of people and mammals and things, there was a time when there was evolution when the brain cells just started grabbing all the resources.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain probably used 80% of your metabolic energy in your body. This is not cancer. This is not bad.
I can see that. I think even the idea.
The two is a critical issue in governments.
Well, the value judgment is, did it kill the host? I think that in your example of the brain consuming 80% of the resources of the body, is that brain did not kill the host. It made the host more capable.
Early in evolution, it may have been quite crappy, and it may have, like, do you imagine this Cambrian explosion of all these species? Most of them actually really sucked.
Yeah.
And, but that was the necessary phase.
Right. I think we're dangerously close to kinds of arguments about, like eugenics kinds of arguments, is like maybe this species shouldn't survive, and this sort of selection process. and the sort of the intentionality of saying, like, could we impose more guidance and control? And I think that dovetails into my argument for governance and wisdom. It says, like, what are your principles? And maybe the principle shouldn't just be a metric, and the metric shouldn't just be who's winning on the leaderboard. And
Things like free speech, equality. So.
yeah, and some of these principles are not quantifiable metrics, like I want as much of X as possible. And so it's easy to measure, easy to observe, let's say, the number of cells or the number of terawatts consumed or the number of individuals in a population. So those are measurable and observable. And you can say, well, your score is better if you get a larger number, and you can be in first place on some leaderboard. But I think if you go back to principles, like, what are the principles that we care about? I think that's a conversation we should be having, and that takes us out of the acceleration world into the wisdom world. Is like, what does wisdom mean, and what are the principles that we care about?
I think if we use humility as a guide to where to apply our governance, what we'll probably find, I think, is that governance systems themselves need to be part of an evolutionary process. They have selection pressures on the governance rules. Mm-hmm. There's survival, there's variation, among subpopulations. Some people will say, let's govern ourselves according to this set of rules. Some people will say, let's govern ourselves according to this set of rules. There'll be selection pressure. Some of those will win, some of those will lose. Yeah. Over time, the environment will co-evolve with them, as it always does, because the individuals are evolving to find the bugs in that particular governance system. Yeah. So the governance system will, again, co-evolve to suppress, those bug-finding individuals and so on. Well, I think it's a sort of a never-ending co-evolution, but the governance system has to be evolutionarily based, just the same way
I think it has to be. I think we are talking about adaptive systems, and so I think what I would call for here is not abandoning or embracing unilaterally. I'd like to say that you have disease patterns, and the disease pattern is a thing that was otherwise pretty okay, but it just kind of, a disease happened. Okay, and as medical doctors, and I'm not including myself in that because I'm not a medical doctor, medical doctors have a set of tools for saying, here's a child. The child is not thriving. There's a problem here. What's the problem with the child? What they don't say is that the child was designed wrong. They don't say that. They say, this is a bad child. They say, this child is not thriving. Let's figure out what the disease is and what are the causes of that disease. And there are many, many kinds of diseases. And there's malnutrition diseases, there's genetic diseases, there's parasitic infection diseases. And my argument is that AIs and governments can succumb to these kinds of evolved patterns. And I don't think that you can eliminate disease, but you can sort of live with it and dial it back, as we have done with so many contagious diseases that science has actually really helped us out. I'd like to just see this particular kind of disease, cancer, and I haven't gotten to it, but its evil twin is autoimmune diseases, which is sort of like the opposite of cancer. I'd like to see a medical practice applied to sort of identifying and fixing these things so that when a nation presents itself, you go like, you have this disease. And everyone can at least say, with some sort of shared reality, that at least you have this disease, and let's go figure out what the cure for that is.
It would be great to have a TSN for nation states.
That's exactly, and I'm not kidding, I think a DSM for AIs and a DSM for nation states is kind of what I'd love to see get built.
Okay.
Michael?
Questions?
Oh, here, Michael had a question.
Oh, yeah. More comments than question, I suppose, because I'm still trying to figure this out. But, if you look back through evolution, you might, if you're some ground loading, the humans are starting to take over, you might say they've got cancer in these people. Like, we have to stop
The
this.
people cancer.
Well, like, you're a rodent, and the humans are killing you. And you're like, you've got to stop these things. They're out of control. They're breaking all the rules. They're growing out of control.
They are.
Right? So, I don't know. if you ask the AI, are you out of control? The AI is like, no, I'm fine. If you ask somebody in your family who has cancer, like, are you okay? Like, no, I'm not okay, because I'm going to die. But the AI is not dying, so I'm not sure the analogy with cancer and the AI is actually accurate. I mean, and who is good and who is good for it and not good for it is in the eye of the beholder. Like, I'm sure the American buffalo didn't think we were great.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to get rid of the humans.
Right.
Because we were fine before they showed up from Europe.
Well, it's a relative question, not an absolute question. So I agree with you. So this is like the says who. Anything that is exhibiting hypergrowth at the expense of some victim, there's a winner and a loser in that story.
Yeah.
And the winner is saying, I'm winning. This is awesome. And the loser is saying, I'm losing. This sucks. Make it go away. And I think that the framing that I have is there's a collective group, and if you step up one level and you say, what is your horizon of inclusiveness for success?
So it seems that if you're talking about society as being organism, the society as an organism has maybe a cancer, because it's now becoming dysfunctional and can no longer operate at some point. Maybe perhaps it will die.
Yeah.
Perhaps AI will kill us if we just allow it to grow unchecked. And the other thing I would say about the government and mutations, and I'm pointing this out, is mutations are good. What, for instance, the Trump administration has discovered through accident or just sheer whatever, you could break all these things that work in government of what the founding fathers put in place, and those I consider like mutations.
Yeah.
And they've taken advantage now of these mutations. They've corrupted our normal system, the normal functioning metabolism of America. They've now corrupted it.
That's
but
true.
If you're Victor Orban or Bolsonaro or any of these other guys, they're like, this is great.
Of course it is.
Great. It's exactly what we want.
They're very, very happy, and what they're doing is they're doing short-term local gains, and their horizon of what is observable and counting for success, it's through the roof. It's like success after success after success. So I guess this is, I think what we're all talking about is, I think, Matt, you mentioned it being fractal. It's kind of all the way down, like, what do we consider to be us and them? What is the us? What is the them? And what is the time scale? Is it good for this 4-year period? Is it good for this 100-year period? Is it good for this 1,000-year period? Now, what is the long-term consequences here? So you get a different answer if you pick a different radius of space and time. And I think that's just the reality of it. Is say, like, governance is probably trying to pick a longer perspective, a larger footprint of who is going to do well, and for how long will they do well. And I think that's the wisdom game. Yes.
Is there an analogy to useful fictions, which was a concept that Yuval Harari introduced as a means for enabling more than 150 people to cooperate at the same time? He said that something happened after we fed our brains better, and a leap was enabled between from very concrete thinking to abstract thinking. And he believes that a combination of some kind of physiological change occurred in the brain, and then also that was enhanced by these shared fictions that would usefully enable people to cooperate. Whether people knew they were fictional or not, generally they didn't, but this was like money systems or religious beliefs, or things that could be socially communicated that everyone would buy in. And so
I think I get what you're saying. And so what we have is an immediate direct experience, which is like, I've touched fire, it burned me, okay, I won't touch fire again. That's like a direct experience, learned experience. And we evolve the ability to have storytelling. Someone can tell me, hey, don't touch fire. I don't have to touch it myself, because my grandfather told me this story. So it's like, so we have learned experiences, and that's kind of what Yelp reviews are. You have distributed brains. Someone says, this is a great pizza place. This is a terrible pizza place. So the distributed information from ancestors and neighbors and friends, whether they're fictional or true, they still allow us to amplify our brains so that we have more decisions that are being made other than through direct experience. And what LLMs today are, they are purely direct experience or inherited experience engines. They could only make decisions based on what they have directly consumed themselves in their training mode. But I can't go to an LLM today, and the way they're usually structured, I'm not saying it's a physical barrier. I'm saying that they're not designed so that I can come in and say, yeah, this is a fact that you need to incorporate and have it preserved and baked into its foundational model. The foundational models are just sort of like read-only. So what happens is you can do things like RAG, and you can add tokens to your conversation with a foundational model. And for a window of time, it will do that. But what happens is if you do too much of that, it actually has a catastrophic collapse. It actually forgets everything that you've ever taught it. So it has a catastrophic forgetting, which is very, very different than human forgetting, which is a slow deterioration of connections that you've made. And the reason why I'm saying this is going back to your useful fictions, which is like, how does a distributed community of individuals share information with each other so that they all profit from that? And that includes urban legends and stories and folklore and things like religion and banking systems, currency systems, international trade, which are fictional stories that become learnable and structures that we can build useful activities on top of. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, part of the operating system, I guess.
It is an operating system, and distributed intelligence is, this goes into the title of my website, which is Artificial Trust. If you go to artificialtrust.com, that's where I have some blog. And so the idea of trust is, okay, well, this guy told me this thing. I could either choose to absorb that and say, yeah, I believe, they say, hey, this pizza restaurant is great. It's kind of a low stakes piece of information. But I'm going to trust that person as a trusted expert. And I'm going to include that to expand my knowledge. And so I get smarter because other people have gone before me. And artificial trust is when you game that system and you say, I'm going to exploit that. So you will trust me so that I can tell you things that are actually serving my goals, not your goals. And now we're back to the individual selfishly doing things. And again, the people co-evolve so that...
The reason I think why the fictions are distinct from if you put your hand in, you get burned.
Yeah.
The reason the fiction is more useful is that it's almost a loyalty pledge. Because it's fiction, if you say you're going to buy into that,
Yeah.
I mean, like Sean Spicer, when he said there were 6 million people at the Capitol, or at the mall
Okay, sure.
at the inauguration. For him to say that, he's buying in to a fiction. And everybody who doesn't say, no, they're right, is buying into that same fiction. And it results in great party discipline.
Yeah.
And it's actually very useful. Like, nobody can say, no, there weren't 6 million.
Well, what you're transferring, I'm going to just remark that the thing that you're now talking about is what I would call labeling. So you want to be a virtuous member of some group, and you have some group identity. And it could be clothing, it could be speech, it could be food, it could be beliefs. But you put labels on yourself to identify yourself to your peer group to say, I am us. I'm not them, I am us. Okay, I eat this food, I speak with this accent, I have these habits, I celebrate these holidays. I think there were 6 million people on the mall. I drive a Cybertruck. I do things which are indicative and symbolic because that is my communication to say, I belong. I am part of this and not my identity. And so label management turns out to be one of the most important things that you can do.
Does
That's what?
It's not currency. We can all agree on using currency.
Well, currency is a form of labor, absolutely. I agree, if we agree that a dollar will give me this much of a particular quantity, or we don't,
Yeah.
right? It's a fiction.
Yeah.
That's not a real thing. I mean, we invented dollars, we say how many muffins a dollar get, and we don't have to all agree, but we do, because we're a member of that group that identified that was.
Yeah, 99.9% agree that the dollar is whatever.
Well, we've chosen an us, and an us is a group that has, by consensual hallucination, agreed that dollars have value, and that we can all, ever since, there used to be a gold-backed standard, but then it said, like, well, what makes gold so special? So the label is a very, very important part of the social cohesion to say, I belong to us. You should trust me. You should listen to what I have to say. And I am part of the strength that you have, and I'm part of the group's strength. And I'm going to free associate a little bit into privacy and the whole idea of privacy and invasion of privacy. It's because what people really want is not privacy. What they want is to control how they're labeled. So I want to identify as a person who belongs to this group and has these habits and these behaviors. I want to choose which labels are attached to me. I don't want to be attached to these labels. Whether they're true or not is almost immaterial. I just don't want that label and that label stuck on me. And what happens is when you invade my privacy, you read my private email, you might find things that would let you stick on labels to me that I don't want you to stick on. Yes, Matt.
Well, I think interestingly and related to before, I think the concept of hierarchy is deep in a lot of this. These labels are hierarchical. So some labels have an army, some labels are backed by police force, and some labels are the ones where you want personal discretion, and there's quite a bit of wrestling over which labels are in which category.
Absolutely, sure. Labels are very potent. They have consequences for group actions and individual enforcement. So that if I have the wrong label and I step into the wrong room and there's a bunch of people who say, hey, you have that label, we're going to treat you in a really bad way because you have that label on you.
Well, people have to argue which labels should be enforceable by the police and which ones should be private and discretionary.
So there are some labels that maybe some of us, I'm sorry, yeah, and that can change over time. So I would say that, for example, being a vegetarian has changed as a label. So some of us, I'll tell you, I eat meat. And there might be a world in which I step into a room and being a meat eater is a terrible, terrible thing. And someone could really do something bad to me because I was a carnivore. Like I know someone who's a vegetarian, and they might have walked into a room and suffered ridicule and abuse because they were a vegetarian. And there's, so these, and I'm picking very benign versions of this. Obviously, you're all thinking about the more serious labels, which have dire consequences. Those group rules are part of the immune system of those groups, where they're saying, we have to kick outsiders out, people who are not proper, respectable members of our group, our hive, our community. If you have the wrong label, that's how we've figured out, and that's how immune systems work. They're just label finders and enforcers. That bounces. And I mentioned before, autoimmune diseases, it's basically just getting your labels wrong. So once you are, perfectly normal cartilage in the body and you get arthritis, your immune system just says, hey, you're a bad guy. We're going to come and treat you like a foreign invader. That's just mislabeling. That's, kind of unfair to arthritis, but that's kind of what lupus and other autoimmune diseases are. So I would say that labeling is a very, very important part of trust. It's a very, very important part of creating governance and community. And it is at the heart of what the privacy conversation is about. It's like, why do I want privacy? I want to manage my labels. I want no one to infer labels about me that I don't have control over. And I think that is the core. That privacy is not about any of those other things. It is entirely about labeling.
Questions, folks?
Okay.
Yes.
So all this talk, so I'm
an AI practitioner, so
Okay.
I look at it mostly from the computer side, but I really like this dimension here. And so aligning into the cancer idea again.
Okay.
And definitely it's a really good practice to separate the governance system from the AI system. We're doing a lot of that already in commercially applicable AI today. But should we be thinking about the governance system also taking on like that medical doctor persona and such as not just enforcing the rules as written, but also looking for those anomalies to where the AI systems start breaking the rules
Okay.
and stop listening to the rules. And then when the medicine comes in, is it fixing some of the rules? Is one of the things we know when we build governance systems in any software is we put in enough rules that we think we've covered it, and then we find a little later income. But with medicine, we'll go into the AI and into the governance layers, and should there be more discipline around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you look at the history of governance, if you go back to the Greeks who started writing books about governance and stuff, governance itself has moved along from the original might means right, the strongest, most brutal person in the tribe is the leader of the tribe. That's what governance was. It's just the strongest person with the biggest hand. Okay, to the idea of parliament and voting and consensus building and all that stuff. This is a sort of maturity of governance, and we can track the history. The people who study political history can tell you that story. So you're asking the question is like, if you separate governance, which is law and law enforcement, think about community police. Who, let's say, take unhoused people and just say, well, you're violating the crime, you're sleeping on a park bench, I'm going to put you in jail. That would be a solution. It has certain outcomes, and we can sort of see what that is. And then there are people who say, well, maybe the proper function of governance is to create community outreach and find the right kinds of mechanisms to work with people who are unhoused and figure out root cause analysis and treatment and stuff to sort of say maybe there's a different solution. So I think that governance also evolves to become smarter, more flexible, more adaptable. And the latter that I was describing is a little bit more like a medical practice. It's diagnostic, it's pattern matching, it's appropriate therapies for appropriate causes, and it's informed by root cause analysis and also optimization of the outcomes. As opposed to just saying, hey, you've violated law number 212. The punishment is this brutal punishment. Therefore, we're just going to execute on that.
So it sounds like we need a kind of intelligence governance as well as the artificial intelligence itself. There's a function the AI is performing, and then we can put intelligence into the governance itself. Even AI in the governance itself, perhaps also still governed by.
Well, I think what I'm probably trying to advocate for here, I don't know if I've done a good enough job, is to say that wisdom is distinct from intelligence.
Yes.
And that wisdom is informed by principles. Like, you actually have to have an articulated principle that you believe in, which is not corrupted, as I started in my talk, talking about how you get this, like, acidification, where the thing that you're trying to optimize for is actually substituted by a proxy, which is easy to measure, but ultimately wrong. And I go back to Goodhart's law, which basically says, if you're optimizing around like a kind of like an easily observable metric, then you're going to stop having that be a good measure of the thing that you're trying to get for.
Interesting.
Yeah. Matt.
I would hypothesize that a good principle, almost definition, can't be represented by one metric.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I easily.
Dimensions.
Yeah, I'd sign up for that. That's a good observation.
I think most of the AI governance principles that have been proposed, get into at least 20 or 30 core principles. That are definitely in conflict with each other.
The catch is that once you have these principles, they're inherently subjective and debatable, and they require governance
Well,
to.
it's funny.
And worse than that, any system that's subject to those principles will evolve to exploit bugs and principles.
Yeah, like for instance, political spending equals free speech, or gun ownership is also some sort of freedom.
So I've been thinking about this particular problem too, and I'll tell you that the thing I'd like to suggest as a possible solution is not a simple, like, two-variable correlation thing, which I think you're also describing. But I think one of the things we use in AIs are tensors, which are large, higher dimensional matrices. And so what I think of a generalized version of the trolley problem, ethics are ultimately trolley problems, right? And usually ethical dilemmas, if you're in governance, you're saying, well, what about the right of the mother versus the right of the child? You know, the right of the immigrant versus the right of whoever the other person in the state is. The right of the gun owner and the right of the person who's on the receiving end of the gun. You know, all these things are ultimately, I think, trolley problems. And one thing that we can do is generalize the trolley problem to a tensor and say that there is actually a large conflict of interest matrix that describes the stakeholders on one axis and the stakeholders on another axis and all the conflicts that they have. And that you can say that there is alignment when you have zero. Of course, it never happens, but if there was a perfect society and everyone was just getting along with everyone, and there was no way in which anything I did would bother anyone else in this room, which is inconceivable, then that would be an identity matrix. That tensor would basically have no conflict of interest, no values. But as soon as you have places and times where there is a conflict of interest, what I think you can do is you can start to actually analyze high conflict and low conflict governance policies by a magnitude of that tensor. And I think there is actually a computable version of this. But that'll be another talk.
All right, I think we have time for one more quick question, and then we should probably go on. And if not, then I will be the first to say thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming, and have a great weekend.